The first time someone asked him to fly the jet, he didn't answer right away. He stood still, one hand on a mop handle, the other holding a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Down the hall, a child's voice echoed from the vending machines asking for quarters. This wasn't a moment built for courage. It was built for exposure. If he said yes, people would ask questions. If he said no, the door would close quietly, the way doors usually did for him. He had spent years cleaning up after other people's work, learning when to keep his head down. But this choice wouldn't stay private. Whatever he decided would change how he was seen by his son, by his coworkers, by himself. And once it happened, there would be no way to return to how things were before. If stories like this matter to you, stay with it. He arrived before the building remembered what it was for. The parking lot lights were still on. The glass doors reflected a man most people wouldn't notice twice. He unlocked them slowly, listening for the click that told him he still belonged there. Inside, the air was cool and stale. He pushed the cart forward, wheels humming low against the tile. Mop bucket, trash liners, spray bottles lined up the same way every morning. Order mattered when nothing else felt steady. He worked the east hallway first. Offices dark, screens asleep. Someone had left a jacket draped over a chair, like they expected to come back any minute. He lifted it carefully and set it on the desk. People trusted the building to hold their things. They trusted him without knowing his name. He wiped fingerprints from the glass conference room. Long strokes. No rush. When he finished, he checked the reflection, not to admire it, just to confirm he was still there. Same uniform, same tired line at the edge of his eyes. He turned away before the thought could settle. Down the corridor, a radio crackled from a security desk. Voices passed through the air numbers, names, instructions. He heard them but didn't listen. Listening led to remembering. Remembering led to places he no longer stood. He emptied bins, tying each bag the same way. The weight told him what kind of day someone had before leaving. Coffee cups meant late meetings. Paper stacks meant arguments. He learned these things without asking. At the far end of the floor, he stopped by a window. Outside, the sky was lightening. Not sunrise yet, just the promise of it. He checked his phone. One missed message. From home. He didn't open it. He already knew what it would say. He pictured his son still asleep, one arm thrown off the bed, breathing slow. He had packed lunch the night before. Left a note on the counter with 3 words and a smile he didn't feel. Routine was how he showed care. It was safer than saying too much. The cart bumped softly as he turned toward the stairwell. He avoided the elevators at this hour. Too exposed. Too many cameras. He preferred the stairs even when his knees protested. Each step reminded him that his body still worked, even if it was tired. On the 3rd floor, the training room lights were on. Someone had forgotten to shut them off. He paused at the door. Inside, manuals were spread across a table. Headsets hung loose from their hooks. A chair was pushed back, angled wrong. He stepped in and fixed it, straightened the manuals into a clean stack, coiled a cable the way it was meant to be coiled. His hands moved without thought. Muscle memory didn't ask permission. He stopped when he realized how long he'd been standing there. The room felt different when it was empty. Less pressure, less performance. He placed his hands flat on the table and leaned forward just for a moment. The silence pressed back. Not heavy, just present. He pulled away and shut off the lights. Back in the hallway, footsteps echoed from somewhere below. He pushed the cart forward again, head down. Pace steady. This was where he was supposed to be. This was what he was supposed to be. This was what paid the rent, what kept the fridge full, what let his son believe mornings were predictable. By the time the building began to wake, he would already be fading into the background. Near the vending machines, a candy wrapper crinkled under his shoe. He bent to pick it up, then paused. The sound carried farther than it should have. He listened until he was sure he was alone. He dropped the wrapper into the trash and wiped his hands on his pants. The day crew would arrive soon. Voices would fill the space. He would nod when spoken to, answer when required, and move aside when someone important passed. It wasn't bitterness, just understanding. As he turned the corner, a badge reader chirped behind a secure door. Someone laughed. Another voice answered. He didn't look back. He finished the hallway just as the first elevator opened. A man in a pressed shirt stepped out, phone already to his ear. Their eyes met briefly. The man nodded, distracted. The father nodded back. That was the exchange. Equal parts acknowledgement and dismissal. He rolled the cart toward the supply closet and locked it carefully. Checked the latch twice. When he was done, he stood there longer than needed, hands resting on the handle. For a second, he imagined walking past the closet, through another door, toward a place he once knew by heart. The thought passed. He picked up the cart again and kept moving. The building was awake now. And so was the part of him he tried not to name. He got home after dark, like most nights. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. He locked the door behind him and set his keys in the bowl by the sink. Same place every time. If something went missing, he wanted to know it was his fault. His son was at the small table, backpack on the floor, papers spread wide like he needed more room than the apartment could give. A pencil rested behind his ear. He looked up when the door closed. "You're late," the boy said. Not accusing, just factual. "I know," the father said. He hung his jacket and rolled his shoulders once, like that might loosen the day. "Did you eat?" The boy nodded. "I saved the apple." "Good." He washed his hands before touching anything else. The water ran warm, then hot. He stood there longer than needed, palms flat under the stream. When he turned around, his son was watching him again. Kids noticed pauses adults thought were invisible. Homework came first. That was the rule. The father sat across from him, not helping unless asked. He read the same paragraph of a newspaper 3 times without knowing what it said. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted to the clock on the wall. The boy tapped his pencil, then stopped himself. "I finished the math. Let me see." The paper slid across the table. Mostly correct. One mistake in the corner, small but obvious. The father pointed to it without speaking. The boy frowned, erased, fixed it. "Good," the father said. He meant more than the work. Dinner was reheated leftovers. They ate standing up, plates balanced on the counter. There wasn't room for 2 chairs at the table unless one of them wanted to sit sideways. They'd tried. It didn't last. The boy talked about school, a substitute teacher, a kid who got in trouble for talking back, a science project due next week. The father listened, nodded in the right places, asked one question too late and another too early. Still, he stayed present. That mattered. When the plates were empty, the father rinsed them and stacked them in the sink. He didn't turn on the dishwasher. Water cost money. Noise carried. The boy brushed his teeth and changed into pajamas without being told. That was new. The father noticed but didn't comment. He folded the boy's clothes from the dryer while he waited. Socks first. Shirts last. He shook each one out before folding, like wrinkles were a personal failure. At bedtime, the boy climbed under the blanket and rolled onto his side, facing the wall. The father stood in the doorway, unsure how long to stay. Too long felt heavy. Too short felt like neglect. "Dad?" the boy said. "Yeah." "Do you like your job?" The question landed harder than it should have. The father took a step into the room, then stopped. "It's fine," he said. The boy didn't answer right away. He picked at a loose thread on the blanket. "You're always tired." The father sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. "That's just how work is sometimes." Oh, the word carried more than agreement. It carried acceptance. The father didn't know which part of that hurt more. He turned off the light and closed the door most of the way. Not all the way. Never all the way. Back in the kitchen, he checked the calendar taped to the fridge. Shifts circled in pen. Bills written small in the corners. A reminder about the science project, underlined twice. He opened the drawer beneath the counter. Inside, wrapped in an old towel, was something he hadn't touched in years. He unfolded the towel just enough to see the edge of it. Smooth. Familiar. He didn't take it out. Instead, he closed the drawer and leaned back against the counter. His feet ached. His shoulders felt tight. He thought about the training room lights left on that morning, about how his hands had known what to do without asking him. From the bedroom, he heard his son shift in his sleep. A small sound. Trusting. The father stood there until the refrigerator clicked off and the apartment settled into its nighttime rhythm. Then he turned off the kitchen light and walked to his room. He lay down without checking his phone. The missed message still waited. He knew it would still be there in the morning. Before sleep took him, he stared at the ceiling and counted breaths. Not to calm himself, just to stay still long enough for the thoughts to pass. They didn't pass. They waited. By mid-morning, the building belonged to other people. Voices filled the hallways. Doors opened and closed without pause. The father moved along the edges, steering his cart where it would be least noticed. He learned early that visibility was a kind of risk. A supervisor stopped him near the loading bay, clipboard tucked under one arm, eyes already drifting past him. "Make sure the third-floor break room gets another pass," she said. Someone complained. He nodded. "I'll take care of it." She was already walking away before he finished the sentence. That was how instructions worked here. They didn't need confirmation. Just compliance. The break room smelled like burned coffee. A mug had shattered near the sink, ceramic shards scattered across the counter. He swept them carefully into a dustpan, slow enough not to miss the smaller pieces. Cuts led to paperwork. Paperwork led to questions. A group of pilots passed by the open door, voices loud, uniforms crisp. They spoke in shorthand, terms that once meant everything to him. Now they passed through him like weather. He kept his eyes on the floor until they were gone. In the training wing, a door was propped open with a chair. He frowned and moved it aside, closing the door until the latch clicked. Secure areas stayed secure. Some rules didn't fade, even when the badge did. Inside, the room was empty except for a whiteboard covered in half-erased notes. He paused, reading them without meaning to. Numbers. Diagrams. Corrections scribbled in the corner. His fingers twitched at his side. He erased the board clean, each pass even and complete. When he finished, he capped the marker and set it back in the tray, aligned with the others. Order again, control again. A younger employee stood in the doorway when he turned around. Not a supervisor, just someone who had noticed. "You always straighten that stuff," the man said, not accusing. "Curious. It's part of the job," the father replied. The man nodded, but his eyes lingered. "You ever work up here before?" The father met his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the cart. No. The answer wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole thing. The man shrugged and walked away. The room felt smaller after he left. The father pushed the cart out, careful not to look back. Later, in the hangar, he scrubbed oil stains from the concrete near the far wall. The smell was sharp. Familiar. He worked harder than needed, pressure in his arms steady and controlled. Sweat gathered at the base of his neck. A plane sat idle nearby, its nose angled slightly upward, as if waiting. He didn't approach it, didn't circle it. He kept his back turned and focused on the stain until it faded into the floor. Someone laughed behind him. He straightened and moved aside as a maintenance crew rolled equipment past. One of them glanced at him, then did a double-take. "You know what you're doing with that," the man said, nodding at the tools. The father wiped his hands on a rag. "I follow the instructions." The man smiled, unconvinced. "Yeah, sure." They moved on. The stain was gone now. The concrete looked like it always had. If you didn't know where to look, you'd never guess anything had been there. By the end of the shift, the father felt the familiar pull between relief and unease. Another day completed. Another day survived. He signed out at the desk, initials small and neat on the page. As he turned to leave, a supervisor called his name. Not the one from earlier. Someone higher. Someone who rarely spoke to him directly. "Hey," she said. "You got a minute?" He nodded. "Sure." They stood near the wall, out of the way of foot traffic. She folded her arms, then unfolded them again. "There's a scheduling issue tomorrow," she said. "Might need some flexibility." He waited. Silence was safer than guessing. She hesitated, then continued. "Someone mentioned you might have experience. Is that true?" The word hung between them. Experience. Broad enough to mean anything. Specific enough to mean only one thing. He felt his pulse pick up. Not fear. Recognition. "I clean the building," he said carefully. She studied his face, looking for something he wasn't offering. After a moment, she nodded. "Okay," she said. "Just checking." She walked away. But the question didn't leave with her. He exited through the side door and stepped into the afternoon light. The sky was clear. Planes rose and fell in the distance, distant enough to be harmless. He stood there for a second longer than needed, then headed for the bus stop. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another message. This one he read. It was from an unknown number. Just a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. And a sentence that shouldn't have followed it. "Do you still remember how to fly?" He didn't reply. He put the phone away and boarded the bus when it arrived. The doors closed with a hiss, sealing him inside. As the bus pulled away, he watched the building recede through the window. It looked the same as it always had, but something inside it had shifted. And this time, it wasn't going to settle back into place on its own. The next morning did not give him time to prepare. He arrived early again, earlier than usual, as if that could put distance between him and the message still sitting unanswered on his phone. The building was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alert, like something was waiting to see what he would do. He moved through the first hallway too fast and forced himself to slow down. Speed drew attention. Attention invited questions. In the break room, two supervisors stood near the counter, voices low. They stopped talking when he entered. One of them smiled, thin and polite. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. They watched him refill paper towels, pretending not to watch. When he finished, he pushed the car toward the door. Before he could leave, the other supervisor cleared her throat. "Can you step in here for a second?" she asked. It wasn't phrased as a command. It didn't need to be. He parked the cart against the wall and stepped back inside. The door closed behind him, softer than expected. The hum of the refrigerator filled the pause. "We had an issue come up," the first supervisor said. "A pilot called out sick, last minute." He nodded once. "Problems happened. They always did." "There's a training jet scheduled for a systems check," the second one added. "No passengers, just a short run." He kept his hands at his sides, still, neutral. "Someone remembered something," the first supervisor said, "about you." The word "someone" spread the responsibility thin enough that no one had to own it. She looked at him directly now. Not unkind, just assessing. "Is it true you used to fly?" The room felt smaller, though nothing had changed. He noticed details he hadn't before. A crack in the counter, a stain on the ceiling tile, the way both women leaned back slightly, as if giving him space to answer. "I was licensed," he said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud in years. "How long ago?" the second supervisor asked. "Long enough," he replied. They exchanged a look. Not excitement, concern, risk calculation. "We're not asking you to do anything yet," the first supervisor said quickly. "Just trying to understand our options." He waited. Silence again. She continued, "if we needed you to step in temporarily, would you even consider it?" The question landed differently than the message on his phone had. This one carried weight. Procedure. Consequence. "I'd need time," he said. The second supervisor raised an eyebrow. "To think." "To make sure it's allowed," he answered. "For everyone." That slowed them down. Rules mattered here. Liability mattered more. "Okay," the first supervisor said after a moment. "We'll check. No promises, no assumptions." She paused. "But we needed to ask." He nodded. That was all he could safely offer. When he left the room, the hallway felt louder. Footsteps echoed sharper. Voices carried farther. He pushed the cart forward, but his hands were unsteady on the handle. He spent the rest of the shift on autopilot. Clean. Replace. Lock. Unlock. He did everything right, but the rhythm was gone. Each task felt like an interruption. At lunch, he sat alone near the loading dock, sandwich untouched. His phone buzzed again. Same number. "They asked you, didn't they?" He stared at the screen, then turned it face down on the table. On the bus ride home, he watched the city pass without registering it. His reflection in the window looked older than he felt, or maybe exactly as old. At home, his son was already there, sitting on the floor with a half-built model plane, plastic pieces scattered around him. "It's hard," the boy said without looking up. "What is?" "This part keeps not fitting." The father set his bag down and knelt beside him. He examined the pieces, fingers moving carefully. "You're forcing it," he said. "Try lining it up first." The boy adjusted the angle, pressed gently. The piece clicked into place. "Oh," he said. The father smiled before he could stop himself. It faded quickly. They ate dinner in silence. Not an uncomfortable one, just full. Afterward, the father washed dishes while his son finished the model. The small plane took shape slowly, imperfect but solid. Before bed, the boy held it up. "It doesn't look like the picture." "That's okay," the father said. "It still flies." The boy considered that, then nodded. Later, after the lights were off, the father stood alone in the kitchen again. He opened the drawer this time and took the object out fully. He unwrapped it and held it in both hands. It was lighter than he remembered, or maybe he was stronger now. He set it on the counter and stepped back as if it might accuse him of something. Instead, it just sat there, patient. His phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail. From work. "Meeting tomorrow morning," the supervisor said. "Formal. We need an answer." He closed his eyes. There was no version of tomorrow where this went unnoticed, no way to clean this up quietly. He wrapped the object again, slower this time, and placed it back in the drawer. Then he locked the drawer and pocketed the key. In the bedroom, his son slept on his back, mouth open slightly, one hand still clutching the small plastic plane. The father watched him for a long moment. "I don't know how to do this without changing everything," he whispered, though no one was listening. The words didn't help. They just made the cost clearer. He turned off the light and lay down, staring into the dark. Morning was coming whether he was ready or not. The meeting was held in a room he had cleaned dozens of times. That fact stayed with him as he sat at the table, hands folded, chair pulled in too close. The walls were bare except for a framed safety notice that had been there longer than most of the staff. He had dusted it every week without reading it. Today, he read every word. 3 people sat across from him. 2 supervisors, one from compliance, a laptop open, a notepad untouched. They spoke carefully, slowly. Each sentence felt tested before it was released. They talked about policy, about liability, about gaps in coverage and emergency exceptions. They made it clear this was not an opportunity. It was a problem they were trying to solve. "You understand," one of them said, "this would be temporary." He nodded. "And limited," another added. He nodded again. No one asked him how it felt. No one asked him how it felt. No one asked why he had stopped flying. Those questions lived outside the room. Inside, only risk mattered. When they finished explaining, the silence returned. It stretched long enough that he felt the urge to fill it. He didn't. He had learned what silence could protect. "What happens if I say no?" he asked instead. They exchanged looks. Honest ones this time. "Nothing," the compliance officer said. "Officially." The word hung there. "Officially." "And unofficially?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "Then people will wonder why we ever asked." He understood that. Wondering was rarely neutral. They gave him until the end of the day. Back on the floor, the building felt altered. Not hostile. Just aware. People glanced at him longer than before. Some smiled too quickly. Others avoided him entirely. A coworker he'd shared break room coffee with for years moved to another table when he entered. Another clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Good for you." Without explaining what that meant, he pushed the cart through it all. Collected trash. Replaced soap. Fixed what was broken. Each task felt heavier. Not because it was harder, but because it was being watched. By the time his shift ended, his chest felt tight. He signed out and left without lingering. At home, his son was quiet. Too quiet. He sat on the couch with his homework done, model plane beside him. "Everything okay?" the father asked. The boy shrugged. You forgot to sign my paper. The father took it, signed his name, handed it back. Sorry. The boy looked at the signature, then at his father. Are you in trouble? The question was simple, direct, no fear in it yet. No, the father said, then paused. Not exactly. They ate dinner without talking much. Afterward, the boy followed him into the kitchen instead of going to his room. Are you going to work late again? The boy asked. I don't know, the father said. The boy leaned against the counter. Thought about that, then said, You don't like not knowing. The father looked at him. Really looked. The boy wasn't accusing. He was observing, the way kids did when they weren't trying to be careful. You're right, the father said. The boy nodded, satisfied, then added, I don't either. That was it. The line. No lesson attached, no meaning explained. Just truth, placed between them. Later, after the boy was asleep, the father sat at the table with the lights off. His phone lay in front of him. Messages from work. From the unknown number. From no one else. He thought about the cost of saying yes. Training hours he didn't have. Scrutiny he couldn't control. A spotlight that would reach all the way home. He thought about the cost of saying no. The quiet closing of a door. The slow shrinking of a life already compressed. At work, silence had protected him. At home, silence was starting to feel like absence. He stood and walked to the drawer, took out the key, opened it. This time he didn't just look. He took the object out and set it on the table, ran his thumb along its edge, checked the small details. Everything was still where it should be. His hand stopped shaking when he held it. The phone buzzed again. A final message from the supervisor. We need to know. He sat there until the refrigerator clicked on and off again, until the building across the street went dark, until the city settled. Then he typed a single word. Yes. He didn't feel relief. He felt exposed. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't protecting him anymore. It was watching. Nothing changed right away. That was the first surprise. He still reported for his shift the next morning. Same uniform. Same cart. Same hallways. The decision sat inside him, heavy but contained. Like something wrapped carefully and set aside. No announcements. No handshakes. Just a quiet awareness that the line had been crossed. He worked slower than usual. Not out of hesitation, but attention. He noticed how his body adjusted to space. How he measured distance without looking. How his hands corrected small errors before his mind caught up. These were habits that hadn't belonged to a janitor's job. They hadn't left him either. During a break, he sat alone near the maintenance office and practiced breathing the way he used to. Not deep, controlled, counted. He stopped when he realized he was doing it automatically. At home that evening, something shifted. Subtle but present. His son asked for help fixing a loose cabinet door. The father brought out tools instead of tape. He measured before drilling. Leveled the hinge. Took his time. You don't rush anymore, the boy said. I never rushed, the father replied. The boy shook his head. You did, before. The father paused. He tightened the final screw and stepped back to check the door. It closed cleanly. Looks good, he said. The boy watched him the way he watched teachers when they explained something important. Not the words, the posture. Later, the father spread paperwork across the kitchen table, old certifications, records he'd kept without knowing why. His son leaned over his shoulder. What's that? The boy asked. The boy's that. Just papers, the father said. They have your name on them, the boy said. Yes. The boy waited. The father didn't explain. He gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them into a folder. That night, after his son went to bed, the father stood in the living room and practiced standing still, feet planted, shoulders relaxed. He closed his eyes and pictured the training jet not flying it, just sitting in it. The smell. The controls. The weight of responsibility. He opened his eyes before the image could finish forming. The next day, they called him in early. Not to fly, to talk, to review procedures, to confirm what he remembered and what he didn't. The compliance officer watched him closely as he answered. He admitted what he'd forgotten, clarified what he hadn't. That honesty earned him nothing visible. But the tension eased. A younger pilot watched from the doorway as he demonstrated a checklist on paper. The pilot nodded once, then left without comment. That felt worse than approval. At lunch, a coworker asked him if he was nervous. No, he said, then corrected himself. Yes. The coworker laughed, unsure if it was a joke. The father didn't join in. That evening, his son waited up for him, sitting on the couch with the model plane in his hands. One wing had been reattached with glue that hadn't dried evenly. I broke it, the boy said. The father sat beside him, took the plane gently, adjusted the angle, held it steady until the glue set. Some breaks don't matter, he said. You just have to be patient. The boy nodded. Is that what you're doing? The question wasn't sharp, just curious. I think so, the father said. The boy leaned back against the cushion. Okay. That was all. No more questions. Later, alone, the father realized something he hadn't allowed himself to before. He hadn't just been hiding from loss, he'd been hiding from responsibility, from the weight of being seen again. Cleaning had been safe, necessary, honest, but it had also been small enough to contain his fear. Now, there was no container. He stood at the window and watched planes cross the sky, white lines fading quickly behind them. He didn't imagine himself in them. He imagined being responsible for them. That was the difference. When his phone buzzed, he answered without looking at the screen. Tomorrow morning, the supervisor said. Early. We'll walk you through everything. I'll be there, he replied. After the call, he didn't sit down. He didn't pace. He simply stood where he was, letting the decision settle fully into his body. In the bedroom, his son shifted in his sleep. The father checked on him, adjusted the blanket, and paused at the doorway. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was disappearing at the edges of his own life. He felt present, and that scared him more than anything else. The morning came too early. Not because he hadn't slept, but because sleep had ended before it finished doing its work. He dressed without turning on the light. Muscle memory guided him. Shirt. Belt. Shoes tied tight enough to stay secure, not tight enough to cut off feeling. He checked the time once, then stopped. There was no benefit in counting minutes now. His son stirred when he passed the bedroom. You leaving? The boy asked, voice rough with sleep. Yes. For work? Yes. For work? Yes. The boy rolled onto his side. Okay, no questions, no warnings, just trust. It settled heavier than anything else he carried. Outside, the air was colder than he expected. The sky hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. He waited for the bus, hands in his pockets, feeling the key press against his fingers. He didn't take it out. He didn't need to. At the building, he didn't go to the supply closet. No cart waited for him. No checklist on the wall. Instead, he was met by the compliance officer and a pilot he didn't know. Older, calm, not curious. They walked together without speaking, past doors he had cleaned around, through checkpoints he had never passed through before. Each badge scan opened something and closed something else behind him. Inside the hangar, the jet sat where it always did, smaller than the ones outside, more contained, training equipment, but still real. The pilot handed him a clipboard. We'll take it slow, he said. You'll be supervised the entire time. I understand, the father said. He didn't say thank you. Gratitude would have suggested this was a gift. They went through procedures on paper first, again and again. The compliance officer interrupted twice to clarify a rule, to narrow a condition, to protect the company. When they finished, the pilot looked at him. Any questions? The father thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, that was true. The questions he had couldn't be answered here. They climbed in. The seat felt familiar and wrong at the same time. His hands hovered for a second before touching anything. He waited for permission that didn't come. Go ahead, the pilot said. The father adjusted the seat. Check the instruments. Not fast, not showy. Just correct. Nothing dramatic happened. No music. No sudden realization. Just work. Afterward, they stood on the tarmac while the jet cooled. The compliance officer spoke first. This doesn't change your employment status, she said. You'll still be assigned janitorial duties outside of approved exceptions. I know, he said. And there will be review, she added. Ongoing. I know, she nodded, satisfied. The pilot said nothing, just watched him, then extended a hand. Good flying, he said. The father shook it once. Firm. Brief. By the time he changed back into his uniform, the weight had shifted. Not lifted, shifted. He felt it in his shoulders, in the way people looked at him now. Not impressed. Uncertain. A supervisor pulled him aside near the end of the shift. This complicates things, she said. People will talk. They already are, he replied. She sighed. You should know this may limit future options. For you. For us. He nodded. That was the cost. Not punishment. Just narrowing. At home, his son noticed immediately. You're walking different, the boy said. The father set his bag down. How so? Slower, the boy said. Then corrected himself. Heavier. The father considered that. I had a long day. The boy nodded. Accepted it, then said, Did you do the thing? The father didn't ask how he knew. Yes. The boy looked relieved. Not proud. Not excited. Just relieved. Okay, he said. Dinner's ready. They ate quietly. Afterward, the father helped with the science project. They glued cardboard and measured angles. The father corrected one measurement, then let the next mistake stand. Before bed, the boy lingered in the doorway. Dad? He said. Yes. You're still my dad, right? The question wasn't childish. It was precise. Yes, the father said immediately. Always. The boy nodded and went to bed. Later, alone in the kitchen, the father removed his badge and set it on the counter. He looked at it for a long time before placing it back on its hook. He understood now. Stepping forward hadn't restored anything he'd lost. It had only clarified what he was willing to lose next. The safety of being unseen was gone. In its place was responsibility, heavier and harder to set down. He turned off the light and went to bed, knowing tomorrow would not offer a reset. It would only ask him to continue. The next morning, the hallway was already being cleaned when he arrived. Not by him. Another man pushed the cart, moving too fast, letting the wheels knock against the walls. He nodded at the father, uncertain, like he wasn't sure which rules applied anymore. Morning, the man said. Morning, the father replied. He kept walking. His badge opened doors that had never opened for him before. The sound was small, a soft click. But it followed him down the corridor, marking each step as different from the last. There was no announcement. No explanation offered to the staff. People filled in the gaps themselves. Some avoided him, some watched more closely. A few nodded with something like respect, though it felt unfinished. He didn't correct anyone. The work he did now was narrower, specific, reviewed twice. He spent more time waiting than acting. That was part of the agreement. Oversight, safety. He accepted it without comment. During a break, he stood near the window and watched the other janitor struggle with a trash bag that had split at the bottom. Papers spilled across the floor. The man cursed under his breath. The father stepped forward, helped gather the mess, tied a better knot. No instruction given. No thanks expected. The man nodded once and moved on. The father returned to his spot by the window. Outside, a jet taxied slowly, turning with care. The father followed its movement until it disappeared from view. He didn't imagine himself inside it. He imagined the weight it carried. Fuel, responsibility, people unseen, that was enough. At home, the apartment felt different, not bigger, just quieter. His son sat at the table, cereal untouched, reading something on his phone. You're early, the boy said. Things change, the father replied. The boy looked up. Studied him. For good or bad? The father considered the question. For real, he said. The boy nodded. He accepted that more easily than expected. They walked to school together instead of taking separate routes. The sidewalk was uneven. The father adjusted his pace without thinking. At the corner, the boy stopped. You don't have to walk me, he said. I know. the father replied. They stood there for a moment. Cars passed. A bus hissed as it pulled away. Okay, the boy said. Tomorrow you can stop. Okay. The boy turned and headed toward the school doors. He didn't look back. That evening, the father cooked instead of reheating leftovers. Nothing complicated, just deliberate. He wiped the counter as he went. Old habits stayed. They ate at the table this time, both sitting sideways, knees almost touching. It wasn't comfortable, but it worked. After dinner, the boy brought out the model plane. One wing still slightly crooked. Can we hang it? The boy asked. Where? The boy pointed to the corner near the window. The father found a hook, measured the distance, drilled once. Clean. Precise. He hung the plane so it faced outward, angled slightly up. The boy stepped back. It looks like it's leaving. The father didn't answer. Later, when the boy was asleep, the father stood alone in the living room. The plane swayed gently when the air kicked on. Not flying, just suspended. He didn't touch it. The phone buzzed once. A message from work, a schedule adjustment. Nothing dramatic, just confirmation that tomorrow would be similar to today. He set the phone down. Outside, a plane passed overhead, low and loud. The father waited for the sound to fade before moving. In the morning, he left the apartment without waking his son. He paused at the door, then closed it carefully behind him. The hallway lights flickered. The stairwell smelled faintly of cleaner. Someone else's cleaner. He walked past the supply closet without stopping. At the building, the janitor's cart was already in motion. The hallways were being handled. He scanned his badge and stepped through a door that closed behind him with a sound he now recognized. Not opportunity. Not escape. Just a change that had taken hold. And this time, when the building woke up, he did not fade into it.